Homeless Omega asked the Alpha Mafia boss for his leftovers, unaware the boss was his missing father. Welcome back, everyone. Before we step into today's unforgettable story, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our latest emotional and heartwarming adventures. Your support helps us continue creating powerful stories filled with hope, family, sacrifice, and love, and we truly appreciate every single one of you. We'd also love to know where you're watching from today, so leave the name of your city or country in the comments below and join our wonderful community. Thank you so much for being here. Now, let's begin the story of our main character. The hungriest hearts are not always searching for food. Sometimes, they are searching for the family they never knew they had. The first snow of December drifted quietly across the streets of Ashcroft, turning sidewalks and rooftops into sheets of pale white that looked almost peaceful from a distance. But peace was a luxury Noah Hayes had not known for years. At 19, the young Omega had learned that winter was never beautiful when you had nowhere to sleep. It only meant colder nights, emptier stomachs, and longer hours spent hoping someone might show a little kindness. His oversized gray hoodie hung loosely over his thin frame, doing little to block the icy wind that slipped through every worn seam. His sneakers had holes near the soles, allowing freezing water to seep inside with every careful step. Still, Noah kept walking. He had promised himself long ago that no matter how desperate life became, he would never steal from another person. If he survived, he wanted to survive with his dignity intact. The downtown district sparkled with warm lights as families gathered inside restaurants to celebrate another successful year. Laughter floated through glass windows while the smell of fresh bread, grilled steak, roasted vegetables, and homemade soup filled the evening air. Noah slowed his pace outside one particular restaurant, not because it looked more expensive than the others, but because the comforting aroma reminded him of something he barely remembered. A childhood dinner, a gentle voice, a feeling of belonging that had disappeared before he was old enough to understand why. He quietly rested one hand against his stomach as it tightened with hunger. Nearly 3 days had passed since his last real meal. Earlier that afternoon, a bakery owner had offered him a stale dinner roll, and Noah had accepted it with sincere gratitude. Even now, he whispered a silent thank you for that small act of kindness. Across the street, several black luxury SUVs rolled to a smooth stop. The atmosphere shifted almost instantly. Well-dressed security personnel stepped out first, scanning the area with calm professionalism before opening the rear passenger door. People nearby lowered their voices. Some quickly crossed the street. Others simply watched. Everyone recognized Vincent Ashford. His name carried enormous influence throughout the city. To the public, he was a respected businessman whose charitable foundation donated millions of dollars every year. Behind closed doors, countless rumors painted him as the mysterious leader of one of the most powerful mafia organizations on the East Coast. No one could separate fact from legend, and very few were brave enough to try. Vincent stepped onto the sidewalk wearing a tailored charcoal overcoat, his composed expression unreadable as snowflakes settled briefly on his dark hair before melting away. He acknowledged no one. His presence alone commanded silence. Noah watched from several yards away, debating with himself. Every instinct urged him to keep walking, yet his empty stomach reminded him he might not have the strength to make it through another freezing night. He swallowed the lump in his throat, gathered every ounce of courage he had left, and slowly approached. Stopping a respectful distance away, Noah lowered his eyes, careful not to appear demanding or disrespectful. His voice was soft enough that the winter wind nearly carried it away. "Sir, if you aren't planning to finish your dinner, would it be all right if I had your leftovers?" The surrounding security team froze. Several employees standing near the restaurant entrance exchanged stunned glances. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. They expected the young homeless Omega to be turned away immediately. Instead, Vincent remained completely still, studying the stranger before him with an intensity he could not explain. Something about the young man's tired blue eyes, quiet manners, and gentle voice stirred a memory buried so deeply that even Vincent himself could not have named it. Seconds passed in complete silence before he finally gave a calm instruction that left everyone speechless. Bring him inside. Noah stood motionless for a heartbeat, convinced he had misheard the invitation. No one had ever responded to his quiet request with kindness, especially not someone whose reputation inspired silence the moment he entered a room. One of the security guards opened the restaurant door without saying a word, and Vincent Ashford walked inside with the same calm confidence he had displayed outside. After a brief hesitation, Noah followed several steps behind, careful not to disturb anything around him. The warmth of the restaurant wrapped around him like a forgotten memory. The scent of freshly baked bread, rosemary, garlic, and slow-cooked vegetables filled the air, making his empty stomach tighten again. Crystal chandeliers reflected soft golden light across polished wooden tables where guests quietly resumed their conversations, although many could not stop glancing toward the unexpected visitor wearing worn shoes and a faded hoodie. Noah lowered his eyes, pretending not to notice the curious looks. He had grown used to being judged by his appearance, but that did not make it hurt any less. Vincent removed his coat and sat at a private table near the fireplace before motioning toward the empty chair across from him. Sit, he said in a calm voice. Noah hesitated. Sir, I do not want to cause any trouble. I only asked for whatever was left. Vincent looked directly at him. I heard what you asked. Sit anyway. Noah quietly obeyed, keeping his hands folded together on his lap. Within moments, the restaurant manager hurried over, expecting instructions about leftovers. Instead, Vincent spoke without looking at the menu. Prepare a fresh dinner. The same meal you would serve me. The manager blinked in surprise before nodding quickly. Of course, Mr. Ashford. Noah immediately shook his head. Please, that is too much. I cannot pay for any of this. Vincent answered simply. I did not ask you to. The conversation ended there. Silence settled between them, but it was not uncomfortable. Noah studied the elegant room while trying to ignore the gentle music playing overhead. Everything felt impossibly far from the shelters, bus stations, and public libraries that had become his temporary homes over the past several years. When the food finally arrived, Noah stared at the steaming bowl of chicken soup, warm dinner rolls, roasted vegetables, mashed potatoes, and grilled chicken as though he had forgotten how to eat. He whispered a sincere thank you, closed his eyes for a brief moment of gratitude, and only then picked up his spoon. Vincent noticed every detail. The young Omega did not rush despite his obvious hunger. He took small bites, paused between each one, and even folded his napkin neatly beside the plate. Whoever had raised him had taught him remarkable manners. That realization stirred something unexpectedly painful inside Vincent. Memories flashed through his mind without warning. A young Omega laughing beneath autumn leaves, gentle blue eyes, promised to build a family someday. The images vanished as quickly as they had appeared, leaving behind an unfamiliar ache that refused to disappear. Vincent found himself asking a question he had not planned to ask. What is your name? Noah swallowed before answering politely. My name is Noah Hayes, sir. Vincent nodded slowly. Do you have family, Noah? Noah looked down at his hands, tracing the edge of the napkin with one finger before speaking. Not anymore. At least, none that I know how to find. The answer lingered in the quiet room far longer than either of them expected. For reasons Vincent could not explain, hearing those words felt less like listening to a stranger and more like discovering that an old wound he believed had healed had never truly closed. Vincent remained seated long after the dishes had been cleared, quietly watching Noah thank every server who approached the table. Gratitude seemed woven into the young Omega's character so naturally that it could not have been an act. When Noah finished the last sip of warm soup, he carefully placed the spoon inside the bowl and smiled with quiet sincerity. Thank you, sir. That was the best meal I have had in a very long time. I will never forget your kindness. Vincent studied the young face across from him, searching for the source of the strange familiarity that refused to leave his thoughts. There was something in Noah's expression that echoed a memory he had spent years trying to bury beneath responsibility, success, and endless work. It was not simply the blue eyes or the gentle voice. It was the quiet strength hidden beneath obvious hardship. Most people who had endured years on the streets either became suspicious of everyone or accepted bitterness as part of life. Noah had done neither. "Where will you go tonight?" Vincent asked. Noah glanced toward the frosted windows where snow continued to fall. "Probably the public transit station. They usually leave the waiting area open all night when the weather gets this cold." Vincent frowned almost imperceptibly. "You have no apartment?" Noah gave a small shake of his head. "Not anymore. I work temporary jobs whenever I can find them, but it has been difficult recently. Most employers see my address listed as a shelter or no address at all. They usually decide someone else is a safer choice." There was no anger in his voice, only quiet acceptance, and somehow that unsettled Vincent even more. Before another question could be asked, Noah reached into the pocket of his worn hoodie and removed a small silver pendant attached to a faded leather cord. The clasp had clearly been repaired several times with careful hands. As he tucked it back beneath his shirt, the pendant briefly caught the glow of the fireplace. Vincent's breathing almost stopped. The design was unmistakable. A crescent moon wrapped around a tiny star. 20 years earlier he had commissioned that exact pendant from a local jeweler as a birthday gift for the Omega he had loved more than anyone else. Only 2 identical pieces had ever existed. One had belonged to Vincent. The other had belonged to the person who had vanished from his life without explanation. Vincent forced himself to remain calm, but his heartbeat grew louder with every passing second. "That necklace," he said carefully. "Where did you get it?" Noah touched it instinctively, offering a soft smile. "It has always been with me. The couple who raised me told me I was wearing it when I was found as a little boy. They said it might have belonged to my mother, so I have never taken it off." Vincent felt the room become strangely quiet around him. Memories returned with startling clarity. Promise beneath autumn trees. Gentle laughter. A silver pendant resting against the chest of the person he had once believed he would spend his entire life beside. He slowly looked back at Noah, realizing that coincidence could explain many things, but perhaps not this. For the first time in decades, a question he had buried deep inside his heart returned with undeniable force. What if the family he had mourned for 20 years had never truly disappeared at all? Noah slipped the silver pendant back beneath his hoodie, unaware that the simple gesture had shaken Vincent more deeply than any business negotiation ever could. The young Omega stood from the table and offered a small respectful bow. "Thank you again, sir. I have already taken too much of your time." Vincent looked at him for a long moment before replying. "You have taken nothing that cannot be replaced." Noah smiled politely, although he did not fully understand the meaning behind those words. As they walked toward the restaurant entrance together, the snowfall had become heavier, covering the sidewalks in several fresh inches of white. One of Vincent's assistants stepped forward with an umbrella, but Vincent raised a hand, signaling him to wait. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and removed a neatly folded business card. "If you need work, come to this address tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. There is no promise beyond an interview, but everyone deserves the chance to earn an honest living." Noah accepted the card with both hands, reading the elegant silver lettering across the front. Ashford Holdings. His eyes widened slightly. Even he had heard of the company. I do not know how to thank you," Vincent answered quietly. "Show up on time." Noah nodded immediately. "I will." With one final grateful smile, he turned and disappeared into the softly falling snow until his figure blended into the quiet winter streets. Vincent remained standing outside the restaurant far longer than anyone expected. His security team exchanged uncertain glances but wisely remained silent. Finally, Vincent entered the waiting vehicle. As soon as the door closed, he looked toward the trusted advisor sitting across from him. "Daniel." "Yes, sir." "Find everything you can about Noah Hayes." Daniel blinked in surprise. "Everything?" Vincent nodded once. "Where he was born, who raised him, every school, every medical record, every legal document. I want verified facts, not assumptions." Daniel had worked beside Vincent for almost 20 years and had rarely heard that particular tone. It was calm, but beneath it rested unmistakable urgency. "I will begin tonight." The vehicle pulled away from the curb while city lights reflected across the snowy streets. Vincent leaned back against the leather seat, but his thoughts remained fixed on one image: the silver pendant. There was no reasonable explanation. He still remembered the afternoon he had purchased the matching necklaces from an elderly craftsman whose small jewelry shop overlooked the harbor. One had been placed around the neck of the Omega he loved with a promise that no matter what happened, they would always find each other again. Days later, everything had changed. Communication had suddenly stopped. Every search had ended in failure. Witnesses claimed an accident had taken the lives of both mother and child before Vincent could reach them. He had believed those reports because every piece of evidence pointed to the same heartbreaking conclusion. Yet tonight, after 2 decades of carrying regret, a young homeless Omega had unknowingly walked into his life wearing the one object that should not have existed anywhere else. Meanwhile, Noah settled onto a wooden bench inside the downtown transit station, carefully protecting the business card inside his pocket as though it were something priceless. For the first time in many years, hope felt more real than fear. He did not know whether tomorrow would truly change his future, but someone had looked beyond his worn clothes and empty pockets and seen a person worth helping. As he closed his tired eyes, he quietly whispered the same words his adoptive mother had taught him as a child. "Kindness always finds its way home." Neither Noah nor Vincent realized that those simple words had once belonged to the same family long before either of them understood how deeply their lives had always been connected. The next morning, Noah arrived at Ashford Holdings 15 minutes early, brushing fresh snow from his shoulders before stepping through the revolving glass doors. The towering lobby felt like another world, with polished marble floors, quiet conversations, and employees moving confidently between elevators. Noah glanced down at his cleanest clothes, which were still faded from years of wear, and wondered if he truly belonged there. Before doubt could persuade him to leave, the receptionist smiled warmly. "Good morning. You must be Mr. Noah Hayes. We have been expecting you." Noah blinked in surprise. "You have?" "Yes, sir. Please take the elevator to the 22nd floor. Someone will meet you there." His nervousness only grew as the elevator climbed higher. When the doors opened, Daniel greeted him with a professional handshake. "Welcome, Noah. Mr. Ashford will see you shortly." Instead of leading him into a formal interview room, Daniel escorted him to a comfortable office overlooking the city skyline. A tray with coffee, hot chocolate, fruit, and pastries rested on a nearby table. "Please make yourself comfortable," Daniel said before quietly leaving. Several minutes later, Vincent entered carrying a simple folder. "Good morning." Noah immediately stood. "Good morning, sir. Thank you for giving me this opportunity." Vincent motioned for him to sit. "Tell me about yourself." Noah answered honestly. He spoke about growing up with an elderly couple who had found him when he was very young, how they had loved him despite having very little, and how both had passed away within the same year after long illnesses. Since then, he had supported himself through temporary jobs, never staying in one place long because opportunities disappeared almost as quickly as they appeared. He never exaggerated his hardships or asked for sympathy. He simply described his life as it had been. Vincent listened carefully, noticing how every answer remained respectful and sincere. Meanwhile, Daniel quietly continued gathering information from investigators across the city. Shortly before noon, his phone vibrated. He stepped into the hallway and opened the newest report. Noah had indeed been discovered as a toddler outside a small church nearly 19 years earlier. No birth certificate had ever been found. No missing child report had matched him. The elderly couple who adopted him had documented every detail they knew, including one unusual item that had remained with the child from the beginning: a silver pendant shaped like a crescent moon embracing a single star. Daniel stared at the report before quickly forwarding it to Vincent. Inside the office, Vincent read the message without changing his expression, but his heart grew heavier with every line. Another coincidence had become undeniable fact. He looked back at Noah, who was quietly thanking an assistant for bringing another cup of hot chocolate. Even after years of hardship, kindness remained his first instinct. Vincent remembered someone else who had lived exactly the same way. Before leaving, Noah smiled modestly. "Whether I am offered a position or not, thank you for treating me with respect. Most people only see what I have lost. You saw what I might still become." Vincent remained silent for a moment before answering. "Come back tomorrow. There are still a few things I would like to discuss." Noah nodded gratefully and walked toward the elevator, never realizing that the investigation meant to answer one simple question had instead uncovered the first pieces of a truth powerful enough to change both of their lives forever. The following afternoon, Noah returned to Ashford Holdings exactly as Vincent had requested, arriving several minutes early despite the freezing weather. This time, the receptionist greeted him by name with an easy smile, and the nervous tension he had carried the previous day eased ever so slightly. Daniel met him near the elevator and escorted him to Vincent's private office. The atmosphere felt different. It was quieter, more personal, as though the room itself had been prepared for a conversation that reached beyond business. Vincent stood beside the large window overlooking the snow-covered skyline before turning to face Noah. "Thank you for coming back." Noah nodded politely. "I appreciate another opportunity, sir." Vincent motioned toward a comfortable chair instead of the conference table. "Before we discuss work, there are a few questions I hope you do not mind answering." Noah smiled gently. "If I know the answers, I will gladly share them." Vincent opened a small notebook. "Do you remember anything from before your adoptive parents found you?" Noah shook his head slowly. "Very little. Sometimes I remember hearing someone sing when I was very young, but I cannot remember a face. I also remember being told that I cried whenever anyone tried to remove this pendant." He touched the silver necklace resting beneath his shirt. "My adoptive mother believed children hold onto important things for reasons they cannot explain." Vincent listened without interrupting. Every word seemed to fit pieces of a puzzle he had spent 20 years believing could never be solved. "Did your parents ever tell you exactly where they found you?" Noah nodded. "Outside St. Andrew's Church on the north side of the city. They said I was wrapped in a warm blanket with no note, no identification, only this necklace." Vincent quietly closed his notebook. That church stood less than 2 miles from the neighborhood where his former home had once been. The coincidence was becoming impossible to dismiss. Just then Daniel entered carrying another folder. His expression remained professional, but Vincent immediately recognized that something important had arrived. "Excuse us for one moment," Vincent said kindly. Noah nodded and stepped toward the bookshelf, respectfully giving them privacy while admiring several old family photographs displayed on a nearby cabinet. Daniel lowered his voice. "We located the retired police officer who handled the original report. He remembers the case because the child was unusually calm. He also remembers a blanket embroidered with the initials N.A. Unfortunately, the blanket was misplaced years later during evidence storage." Vincent looked toward Noah, whose attention remained on the photographs. "Anything else?" Daniel hesitated before answering. The officer also said there were unconfirmed rumors that someone had been searching desperately for an Omega and a missing child during that same week, but the investigation never connected the reports. Vincent slowly exhaled. For years he had accepted the official conclusion that everyone he loved had been lost forever. Now every new fact pointed in another direction. When Daniel quietly left, Vincent joined Noah near the photographs. Noah smiled as he studied an old picture of a young couple standing beneath colorful autumn trees. "They look very happy," he said. Vincent looked at the faded image, his expression softening for the first time in years. "They believed their family would always stay together." Noah nodded thoughtfully. "I hope they did." Vincent looked at the young Omega standing beside him and felt an unfamiliar certainty growing stronger with every passing moment. The answers were finally within reach, and although neither of them knew what the next day would reveal, destiny had already begun leading father and son toward the truth that had waited patiently for nearly 2 decades. The next morning began with quiet anticipation. Noah arrived at Ashford Holdings carrying the same careful optimism that had guided him through every difficult season of his life. Instead of waiting in the reception area, Daniel greeted him immediately. "Mr. Ashford would like to see you in the family lounge today." Noah followed him down a quieter hallway, surprised that they were not heading toward the executive offices. The room they entered felt warm and lived in, with bookshelves lining the walls, comfortable chairs near a stone fireplace, and framed photographs spanning decades. It looked less like the headquarters of one of the city's most influential companies and more like the home of someone who treasured memories. Vincent was already there, standing beside a small wooden table. Resting upon it were several carefully preserved items: a faded photograph, an old journal, and another silver pendant identical to the one Noah had worn every day of his life. Noah stopped walking. His eyes remained fixed on the necklace. "That looks exactly like mine." Vincent nodded slowly. "Because it was made with yours." Noah looked up in confusion. Vincent gently picked up the pendant, holding it in the palm of his hand. 20 years ago, I asked a local craftsman to create 2 matching necklaces. One was for me. The other was for someone very important." Noah instinctively touched the pendant beneath his shirt. "My adoptive parents always believed it belonged to my family." Vincent took a slow breath before continuing. "Yesterday, I visited the retired jeweler who made them. He kept detailed records of every custom order. He remembered the design immediately. He confirmed only 2 were ever created." Silence settled over the room. Noah struggled to understand why his heart was suddenly racing. Vincent stepped closer, his usually steady voice carrying an emotion that few people had ever heard. "I also met the retired police officer who handled the report when you were found outside St. Andrew's Church. He remembered the necklace. He remembered the blanket. And he remembered hearing that someone was desperately searching for a missing Omega and a small child during that same week." Noah's breathing became shallow. Memories that had never fully formed seemed to flicker at the edge of his mind. A warm voice humming softly, strong arms lifting him, the scent of cedar and winter air. Nothing complete, only scattered fragments. Vincent opened the worn journal resting on the table. Between its pages was a photograph of a smiling young Omega standing beneath brilliant autumn leaves. Around the Omega's neck hung the same crescent moon pendant. Beside the Omega stood a younger Vincent, his arm resting gently around the Omega's shoulders, as both smiled toward the camera with unmistakable happiness. Noah stared at the picture for several long seconds. Something inside him stirred with unfamiliar warmth. "I have seen those eyes before," he whispered, pointing toward the young Omega in the photograph. "When I look in the mirror." Vincent's eyes glistened, but he remained composed. "The investigators have compared every document they could find. There is no official birth record because the hospital archives from that year were destroyed in a flood. But every surviving piece of evidence points to the same conclusion." Noah slowly looked back at Vincent, unable to speak. Vincent's voice softened almost to a whisper. "Noah, I believe I am your father." The words seemed to stop time itself. Noah did not answer immediately. He simply searched Vincent's face, noticing for the first time the same shade of blue in their eyes, the similar shape of their smile, and the quiet kindness that had drawn him to trust a stranger on the coldest night of the year. Neither of them reached for certainty too quickly. They both understood that a truth this extraordinary deserved more than hope alone. Vincent quietly placed a sealed envelope on the table. Inside was the paperwork for a voluntary family DNA test that would provide the final answer. Noah looked at the envelope, then back at the man standing before him, realizing that the life he believed had been written in loneliness might have been leading him toward this moment all along. 3 days later, the laboratory completed the analysis. Vincent received the sealed envelope just after sunrise, yet he did not open it immediately. Instead, he asked Daniel to invite Noah back to the family lounge one final time. The hours passed more slowly than either success or failure had ever moved before. When Noah arrived, he immediately noticed the envelope resting on the wooden table between them. His hands trembled ever so slightly, not from fear alone but from the weight of every unanswered question he had carried throughout his life. Vincent stood as Noah entered, offering the same quiet respect he had shown from the very beginning. "Thank you for coming." Noah nodded. "I was not sure I would be able to sleep until I knew." Vincent understood completely. He carefully picked up the envelope, paused for a long moment, then opened it. His eyes moved across the report once, then a second time, as though he needed to be certain he was reading the words correctly. Finally, he lowered the papers and looked directly at Noah. His voice remained calm, but his eyes revealed emotions he had hidden for decades. The report confirms a biological relationship with greater than 99.9% certainty. Silence filled the room. Noah did not speak. He simply stared at Vincent, trying to absorb the reality that the stranger who had welcomed him into a warm restaurant only days earlier had been searching for him without even knowing it for nearly 20 years. Vincent slowly stepped closer. "I never stopped loving the family I believed I had lost. If I had known you were alive, I would have searched every city in this country until I found you." Noah felt tears gathering despite every attempt to remain composed. "I always wondered why nobody came for me." Vincent's expression filled with quiet sorrow. "Because I was told you were gone. I believed the reports. I mourned both of you every single year." Noah lowered his head as emotions he had buried since childhood finally surfaced. "My adoptive parents were wonderful people. They gave me love when they did not have much else to give. But there was always a part of me that wondered where I came from." Vincent smiled gently. "You came from people who loved you more than you ever realized." He reached into a nearby cabinet and carefully removed a small wooden memory box. Inside were photographs, handwritten letters, hospital bracelets, and tiny baby socks preserved with extraordinary care. Vincent handed Noah the first photograph. It showed a smiling infant wrapped in a familiar blanket embroidered with the initials N. Noah looked closely before his eyes widened. Around the baby's tiny neck rested the same silver pendant he still wore today. His fingers shook as he touched the photograph. Vincent quietly said, "That picture was taken on your first birthday." Noah could no longer hold back his emotions. Tears rolled down his face, not from sadness alone but from the overwhelming realization that he had always belonged somewhere. Vincent did not rush toward him. He understood that trust could never be demanded. Instead, he waited patiently. After several quiet moments, Noah looked up through tearful eyes and took one careful step forward, then another. Finally, he stood close enough to see every line of regret and hope written across Vincent's face. His voice was barely above a whisper. "I have wanted to say this to someone my whole life, but I never knew who that someone was." Vincent remained silent, allowing Noah to choose the moment for himself. Noah smiled through his tears, the same gentle smile that had first caught Vincent's attention on that snowy evening outside the restaurant. "Dad." For the first time in nearly 20 years, Vincent allowed himself to believe that the family he thought had disappeared forever had finally found its way home. Spring arrived quietly, and with it came a kind of peace that neither Vincent nor Noah had ever believed they would experience together. Their lives did not transform overnight, nor did they try to erase the years that had separated them. Instead, they chose something far more meaningful. They built a family one ordinary day at a time. Noah accepted a full-time position at Ashford Holdings, not because he was Vincent's son, but because he had earned the respect of everyone who worked beside him. His honesty, humility, and willingness to help others quickly made him one of the most admired employees in the company. Vincent insisted that every promotion Noah received would be based entirely on merit, and Noah appreciated that decision more than words could express. Outside of work, they spent countless evenings sharing memories. Vincent spoke about the Omega Noah's mother had been, describing a person whose kindness could brighten an entire room and whose laughter had once filled their home with happiness. Noah listened carefully, collecting every story like a precious gift. In return, he shared memories of the elderly couple who had raised him with unconditional love despite having very little. Vincent visited their graves with Noah one quiet Sunday afternoon, placing fresh flowers beside the simple headstones. Standing together beneath the clear blue sky, Vincent softly thanked them for giving his son the childhood they could when he had been unable to. It was one of the most sincere moments of gratitude either man had ever experienced. Months later, Vincent announced the creation of the Hayes Family Foundation, choosing Noah's adoptive family name to honor the people whose compassion had preserved his son's gentle heart. The organization focused on providing meals, temporary housing, education, and career opportunities for homeless young people throughout the city. Noah personally volunteered every weekend, greeting every visitor with the same warmth he had once longed to receive himself. He never forgot what it felt like to stand outside in the cold wondering whether anyone would notice him. One snowy evening, nearly a year after their first meeting, Noah stood outside the very same restaurant where everything had begun. A nervous teenage Omega approached quietly, wearing a thin jacket against the freezing wind. The young stranger lowered his eyes and hesitantly asked, "Sir, if you are not going to finish your dinner, may I have your leftovers?" Noah smiled gently because he recognized the courage it had taken to ask those simple words. Instead of handing over leftovers, he opened the restaurant door and replied, "Come inside. A warm meal tastes even better when it is shared." As the young Omega stepped into the warmth, Vincent watched proudly from a nearby table. Their eyes met, and neither of them needed to say anything. They both understood that kindness had completed a circle that began on a cold winter night when a hungry young man dared to ask for help instead of giving up hope. Before leaving the restaurant together, Noah looked at the silver pendant still resting around his neck. It no longer represented unanswered questions or painful loss. It had become a reminder that love could survive years of silence, that family could find one another even after impossible separation, and that a single act of compassion could change generations. Sometimes the greatest miracles do not begin with extraordinary power or impossible luck. Sometimes they begin with one humble request, one open heart, and one person willing to see the humanity in a stranger. And in the end, Noah discovered that the home he had searched for all his life had been searching for him as well.